Hello. Okay. Great. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Hope everybody's comfortable. However, it's good to see everybody here. People are still coming in. Let me just, okay, adjusting things here. Very good. All right, so we'll start. And shalom and bruchim habayim and welcome to Limmud, Ottawa. I'm Jenny Robert, and on behalf of the Limmud Ottawa team, we thank you for joining us here this afternoon. We want to acknowledge that Limmud Ottawa's creative content and programming is mostly developed on unceded ancestral lands of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. It is a privilege to introduce the third part of our virtual Sefira series, Shira Tzefonit, or Northern Poetry, Chapter 2, created and curated by Seymour Mayne, is the second installation of a special online anthology of Jewish Canadian poetry. We thank Seymour for giving us once again an opportunity to redirect our gaze away from the post-traumatic pandemic upheavals and reminding us how poetry, specifically Jewish poetry, offers resilient foresight by unpacking the memories and collective wisdom of an uprooted and displaced people. We want to thank our two guest poets joining us today, Ricky Friesem from Rehovot, Israel, originally from Toronto, and Morty Schiff, originally from Montreal, but now resides in New Jersey. A quick reminder, we will have a Q&A at the end of the readings. Enter your questions in the chat, and time permitting, we will do our best to get through as many questions as possible at the end of all the readings. So we also offer the live captioning. If you look at the Zoom menu bar, just click on More, where you have 3 dots, and enable either the closed caption or if it says live transcript. The program is being recorded and it will be uploaded on the Limmud website, where you will also find the bios and the work links of our participating poets. Make yourselves comfortable, and without any further delay, I'm honored to hand this over to our host, our poet and author and Limmudnik and dear friend, Seymour Mayne.
Thank you, Jenny. Limmudnik, I'm worried about that word. It has lots of rhymes I don't like. I'm just joking here. I'm really happy we're doing another chapter in our Northern Poetry series. We started off last year with 4 poets, Karen Schenfeld, Rona Shafran, Glenn Rochin, and me. Oh yes, I should tell everybody welcome, bienvenue, bruchim habayim. So what the idea of this series over the next little while is to provide a online anthology of Jewish Canadian poetry for 2 reasons. One, I did an anthology in 1985 called Essential Words. It was the first anthology of its kind in Canada, a full anthology devoted to English Canadian Jewish poetry. From its beginnings until then, the 1980s, it would be difficult to add to it now because it would be twice the size. The second thing is to create a archive so that after we do this reading today, you can go back, and you can also go back and listen to the earlier program, Chapter 1, and in between, Max Layton, Irving Layton's older son, and I did a pretty extensive program on Irving Layton's poetry as published in a special issue of the California magazine Shira. So it's all available on the Limmud website, and Limmud also has other partners, including the Vered Jewish Canadian Studies program, which I represent here, and the Zelikovitz program at Carleton, and a number of community organizations joining together to provide this venue. I was looking around a couple of months ago. I was wondering. In the past, we've had a number of older poets who, some or other, have fallen between the cracks. That which is the latest, the most fashionable, gets a lot of attention. And I began to look around, and then we lost two poets. We lost one, and then we lost another two poets who died in the past year, who are not too well known. I won't give you their names right now. And I thought, well, we have to get a fuller profile of all these poets. And I remember that many, many years ago, when I was editing the poems of the great Yiddish lyricist Rochel Korn, who was living in Montreal, and CBC gave me the permission to do a 1 hour program on Rochel. She spoke English very well, but with a Polish Yiddish accent. And we were going to publish her first selected poems in English. And everything was being set up. It was September 1982. She fell ill early in September. She saw the proofs of her book, which came out in September, but she passed away in the middle of September. And I never did get those wonderful stories and that voice on a program for the CBC. Now, that doesn't mean I want to make sure that both Ricky and Morty live to 120, but I want to make sure that we preserve their work and that it's made available. And what's interesting about both of them is that they left Canada, in their 20s for different parts of the world. And I'm going to be asking them afterwards about the influence of Canada all the way through those years. They left, but they continued to write and to publish. And they're very much part of the Jewish Canadian literary landscape. So without further ado, let's follow the alphabetical order of the poets and turn to Ricky, who will be reading to us from Rehovot, Israel, where it is now evening. And for most of us here in Canada, it is now a rainy afternoon. Ricky, please, the floor is yours, so to speak.
Thank you, Seymour. Thank you so much. Großen Dank for this marvelous opportunity. It's rare that a poet gets a chance to read a body of work to an audience, an intimate audience like this. And when I had to choose, it's like choosing which child you love best. So to get around it, I decided to choose poems and read them in a chronological order. And since I'm a journalist by training, I don't think I need much explanation. My first poem, My Sin. My grandfather would stride down autumn streets, swept cold and rusted by a wind so strong it flung his prayer shawl wildly round his legs. It was the long and heavy kind, rich ivory and black with knotted fringes thick enough to braid. He'd march straight-backed and shoulders squared, his arms swinging briskly back and forth. From time to time, his hands would shoot up to his head to keep the gusts from carrying off his skull cap. God forbid. He wasn't old, my Zayde, only to me, a little girl of 8 or so who dragged behind him, far behind, so no one seeing us would guess that we too were a pair. That's the Toronto chapter, as is this. Piano lessons. Miss Laura Wilkins taught me piano, harmony and counterpoint, semi-breves and minims, crotchets, quavers and the like. She was thin and wore silk dresses, flower patterned and high-necked. Her 2 spaniels came to greet me, clicking nails on hardwood floors. And the floors were always polished to a burnished golden brown, and we sat on splendid armchairs and drank tea from china cups. I would play and she would scold me. You must practice more, she'd say, shake her head without disturbing her coiffure or sculpted waves. In the air, a trace of perfume, mostly lavender or rose, and the lamps cast cozy islands of warm light around the room, where a child of shtetl parents sampled Goyish once a week. My father had a great influence on my life, and he died early. This is called Tata's Fedora. You glide into my memory, fedora trench coat silhouette, in film noir fog, though heaven knows, no Bogart you, my tate, though it was the 40s, and no Casablanca, the veranda, where you paused to light a smoke and check the angle of your brim one more time, for you were vain, my tate, even you. And with a shrug, like Bogart, you'd step out into the light to face antagonists, protagonists, the local socialists, the Zionists for whom you were too left, too right, too much a Yiddishist or not enough to satisfy these parlor politicians. And on the night your heart gave out, they dragged you gasping home to die without your gray fedora, left behind on some cheap folding chair in a drab meeting room above a store where you fought your last battle. That's a mine. I think there are some people here who will especially relate to this. This is a poem from my youth movement days. I grew up in the Zionist socialist youth movement, and I had a wonderful youth. Independence Day blues. It wasn't the ideology or the history or even the Bible that brought me here. Truth is, it was the music. It was those Friday nights when we teenagers would meet to dance wild horrors, depkas, troikas, dancing ourselves into a frenzy until finally, one by one, we would sink to the floor to sit cross-legged in a circle around our campfire, a Shabbat candle stuck into an empty bottle, and the singing would begin. We sang workers' songs, protest songs, anthems from the Spanish Civil War, blues from the Deep South, our young souls resonating to the chorus of oppression. We sang melodies from Mother Russia, wordless Hasidic tunes from Yemen with their syncopated beat, sounding so exotic to our chilled Canadian ears. How we reveled in the diversity of our people. But mostly we sang in Hebrew, mouthing words we didn't understand, keeping the melodies aloft for hours, one song merging into the next. And so, embraced by the camaraderie, high on the music, we were swept to a distant new home, to a reborn state, where the same music played on for a while, a familiar soundtrack sustaining us in our unfamiliar life. But today, on this yet another Independence Day, the hollow echo of those very same songs is breaking my heart. My town. I don't know whether it should remain, no, it's not anonymous. You know I come from Rehovot. My town. My town's a dirty town, a garbage and empty lots, urine in dark corners, potholes and unlit streets towns. I love it. My town's a pungent town, a guava ripe in season, steaming sweet corn on the street, falafel frying fresh bread, baking town. I love it. My town's a technicolor town, an open market, rainbow outfits, rugs and bales of cloth in gypsy colors, bougainvillea growing wild town. I love it. My town's a noisy town, a street musicians, radio blasting, hawkers, talkers, children babbling, horns honking, loudmouth kind of town. I love it. My town's a walking town, a crowded sidewalk, bustling, busy, baby stroller, wheelchair pushing, high heel, low heeled, on the move town. I love it. My town's a dot on the map. I can't believe I'd ever end up here. No one has ever heard, not even a decent concert hall or park town. I love it. My town is a familiar faces town, a stop to chat outdoor cafe, greet me by name, know what I like, feel at home, full of life, people town. That's why I love it. I've had the good fortune living in Israel, like many Israelis, to travel a great deal, both in connection with my work and my husband's. And one of the most amazing trips we ever took was along the eastern border of Turkey from the south to the north. This poem is one of the series I wrote then. On the walls of Diyarbakir. Yesterday, the name meant nothing. Diyarbakir, a tangled string of letters tying up my tongue with unfamiliar sounds that challenged me to mouth them in a word that hung unclaimed by memory until it slipped unhindered from my mind. That was yesterday. Today, I stand on blood-black basalt ramparts, thick as China's wall. My Turkish guide, at ease in a great patch of shade cast by a crumbling watchtower, dispatches ancient history with flat automaton monotony. His mind is unengaged, while my mind awakens to familiar nightmare names. Oh, Hittites and Assyrians, Macedonians and Medes. Oh, Persians, Roman, Byzantine, all vanquished, dead, he says. I scan the plain and tremble. Thundering hoofs pound in my ear. Diyarbakir, Diyarbakir, familiar now as fear. So to read an ancient fortified city in a World Heritage Site situated on the banks of the Tigris River, in which I soaked my feet. This is another poem from the same series. Our matriarch Rachel came from Haran. There's a dispute whether the real Haran is in Turkey or in Iraq. I choose to believe that it's in Turkey, where I was. I found her where she'd always been, my Rachel, in Haran. Beside the village well, she stood, just as the Bible said. And she was far more comely than all the words and pictures in my head. A Gauguin skin, thick auburn hair, and eyes green as the sea she'd never seen and would never see in that seer land where yellow dust blows up in clouds and gnats dance in the air. Instead of a clay water jet, she held an infant wrapped in rags. Another pulled her arm. Her arms were thin. She was so small, a child herself, and yet her gaze was bold. She mocked me with those sea green eyes. And so I turned and fled and left her there in Haran, where she weeps now and waits for me, my Rachel, mother, matriarch, mine. Another place that where I spent about 9 months of my life was in Berlin. And it drew forth a lot. These are one of the poems. Invisible in Berlin. Invisible, my hair gray blonde with coat to match and low-heeled walking shoes. I fit right in and no head turns to look at Fegel's Riffgale here in Berlin. Shh, Mamashi, don't cry. I've come to haunt them. Ich bin da, Berlin. They speak to me in German. Clipped, harsh hammer sounds pound in my ear, while in my head, I round their words into soft drops of Yiddish from your tongue. Shh, Mamashi, I've not forgotten. Can't you hear? It's through your mama Lashon I respond to them. Inside the shops, I join prim matrons riffling racks of well-cut clothes. Few frills or flowered fabrics here. The clean lines suit me too. I put the dress I chose back on the rack and take it out again. Yes, Mamashi, of course I see it too. The yellow star on every dress I chose. The lake at Wannsee is calm and steely blue, and sailboats skim right past the villa where your mother's, sister's, brother's fate was sealed. Hey, mein Herren Heydrich. Eichmann, look at me. You're dead, and I'm here ordering a beer. No, Mamashi, I didn't drink the beer. How could I in that place? But oh, the joy of giving the command. Eine Weiße bitte, danke, Han. At breakfast time, the waiter lights the candle on my table. It's a custom here, Gemütlichkeit, warm coziness to make me feel at home. I can't help smiling at the irony, and he, mistaking it for thanks, smiles back. He wasn't German, Mamashi. Italian probably, or Greek. The waiters usually are. A woman's safe here out at night, they say, I take them at their word and follow sounds of laughter to a square where cafe crowds spill onto the sidewalk, lit by lanterns in the trees. A chair is offered and I sit, about to order, when the siren's loud wail stops me dead. I'm all right, Mamshi, just fine. Would you believe a saxophone could give me such a fright? Vacation thoughts. Then too, they must have floated on the summer seas and sprawled on deck chairs in the sun, and ogled Frauleins on the beach, and raised a frosty stein time after time, while your fine bones, already ash, were rising up their chimneys to the sky. Flashback. This is with a special thanks to Seymour, who introduced me to the word sonnet form, and I've become quite addicted. Flashback. When his tiny hand confidently curls into mine, I remember Auschwitz and the selection. My Kristallnacht poem. Is that how it was? Is that how they sat in their cozy salons and puffed on their pipes and sipped their sweet tea and read the day's news and nodded their heads and heaved a deep sigh and listened to Bach, and outside the mobs marched and shattered and burned and shouted for blood, and they sat in salons and they listened to Bach? Is that how it was? This is part of a long narrative poem and of a story that has haunted me all my life. It's the story of my aunt who left Haifa in August 1939 to visit her mother in Belarus, then Poland, and we never heard from her again. This is an excerpt from a longer poem. How long I've waited for this moment, for the current that swept us apart to bring us back together. The current that carried my mother, Fagel, your sister, away from Belarus, far, far away, to the safety of the Canadian prairies, to the shelter of a Jewish enclave in a glacial sea of strangers, to the flat sound of a foreign language and the hollow tone of a passionless music that failed to quell the fires burning in her soul. How I waited for that current to pry me from my comfortable Canadian shelter and sweep me to the shore to which every fiber in my being has been drawn since birth, before birth, the shore whose magnetic force pulled at the fluid that cushioned me in Fagel's womb, that lined up my genes like metal filings, drawing them irrevocably into its field, as it drew the genes of my ancestors from Spain, from Italy, from Poland, as it once drew you, dearest Sarah, and maybe again. I search and search in the faces of the little ones. Your grandchildren, Sarah? I see them making their way to school, the heavy Hebrew books bearing down on their pliant young backs. I see them lining up to join the ballet classes, their hair pulled into sprightly bouncing curls over each ear, the bright ribbons poking up and flagging them immediately for what they are. Russian immigrants, we call them, shiksas and whores, and sometimes brain power, and sometimes cannon power, and sometimes, Sarah, sometimes the future of our nation. The streams now are joined, Sarah, and we are as one, back home at last. At home here, I have 12 grandchildren, 6 boys, 6 girls. This is a poem I wrote after the graduation, high school graduation of one of my granddaughters. High school graduation. Solemnly they file onto the stage to receive their diplomas. Girls in short white dresses, firm thighs flashing with every step of their oh-so-high-heeled shoes. Guys looking ill at ease in their crisp white shirts, dark pants, with the occasional maverick making a statement, shirt tails hanging loose, scruffy shoes untied. The strain of repressing their usual exuberance is broken by a nervous giggle here, a stumble there, as the audience, seated in an island of white plastic chairs set on the wide green lawn, looks on expectantly. The speeches are too many, too long, all promise a better time to come. And when the band strikes up a medley of familiar songs from our shared past, a tangible swell of national pride sweeps over the crowd. We are as one, and for a brief moment, I may be forgiven for imagining that everything is still possible. That these graduates will find true love, that these young women will have control of their lives, that these young men will emerge unscathed from the army, and that I, one of the many proud grandmothers looking on, will be able to retrieve the optimism of my youth. But when I look up at the stars, the very same stars that look down on Abraham, I am reminded of just how perilous are the promises made in this promised land. Peace. My friend sent me a photo from somewhere in Sweden. She is sitting beside a cobalt blue lake, wrapped in a white robe, knees to her chest, head tilted to the sun. In the background, a steep ochre cliff into which someone has hammered a row of towel pegs, perfectly rounded and painted cobalt blue to match the lake. And I think how wonderful it must be to live where a row of towel pegs in the middle of nowhere still matters. And this, to sum it up, dream house. In the travels of my mind, I've wandered far in search of picture-perfect places where I thought I could find peace. Yet here I am, content beside you, in a place that knows no peace, but where at last I feel at home. Thank you. Thank you for your attention. And
Speaker is supposed to be me.
I hope I've been unmuted all evening.
Thank you, Ricky. I'm just waiting for the image to come back to me. Thank you very much, and especially for that, actually not just Canadian, but that very, I would say, Jewish and Israeli sensibility, feelings, emotions that are embedded in your poems. There's a lot of feeling and a lot of resonance. If you're interested in Ricky's poetry, you don't have to just look at our archive, which is going to be online. I know of two books that I think are available on Amazon.com. Keep your distance. So you can see that these are her word sonnets, the affliction of which I'm responsible when I gave a talk about it about 11 years ago at Tel Aviv.
Right. Little did you know that I have two books of word sonnets, and there are probably more to come.
Yes, I think I have. There's a whole group of word sonneteers in Israel that came out of that session. And the other one is a more selected poems. You'll see your middle name is Rappaport. That must have been your maiden name, right?
Yes,
And Laissez Passer, poems 201, 2009. And they're very nice. This one beautifully set out, the poems and the illustrations. So I'll just send you off to Amazon.com. Our second reader is Morty Schiff, and I should declare a kind of a conflict of interest. It's kind of I heard of Morty when I was at McGill in the early 1960s, but then I reminded myself that Morty was the older brother of a friend of mine who lived 4 or 5 doors south of where I lived on Saint Urbain in Montreal in the 1950s, and Morty had the great distinction of being the student who had the highest matriculation mark for the province, for the English school system in the province of Quebec in the 1950s. But I saw his work, and then I saw it in Raymond Souster did an anthology in 1956 in a very limited edition where he introduced a generation of poets, including Morty, Leonard Cohen, Maria Fiamengo, Darrell Hine, a number of others who went on to publish and to work for a lifetime. So just a few years ago, I was reestablished contact with Morty, this time on dealing with poetry. And Morty had gone off to teach in the US, but had continued to publish poetry. And his name still kept cropping up in various essays and things that dealt with that very fervent 1950s when there were more poets at McGill than probably squirrels running around the three bears, the statues in the middle of the campus. So I'm really pleased to introduce you to Morty, and he will read from his selected poems, and then I'll ask questions afterwards. Morty, welcome. The floor is yours. Well, it's not the floor, the screen.
Thank you, Zalman. Very, very moved by your introduction. Zalman, I think you and I quite outdo the Queen. I think we know each other for 70 plus years. Almost frightening to say. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for inviting me. Means a lot to me. And Ricky, I listened to your poems, very, very moved by them, their authenticity, their coming right from the heart. You have so much to say that it almost seems as though it's automatically produced, but I am aware of the poetic brilliance behind the various works. Thank you very much. Thanks. A few works then of my own. Conversation. I caught the perfect bubbles that you blew between my words against my staring eyes, and in the burst of dampness came a clue to deal with leaden grammars in disguise. Dazzled, I went on to ask the mist as the thickened doubles kissed and died in a wet funereal swoon, whether in such an age as this, the moon in all its cool yellow extravagance was also catchable like this, a message past the one of synthesis, caged in bubbles, bursting all by chance. Another
Oh, Morty.
Sorry.
Sorry, that was my fault. Continue.
Conversation. Stationed at the window seat, arms folded, you gazed into the dusk. Sunday, 5 o'clock. Outside, New York was choked with litter. I leaned my cheek against my hand, engaged your gaze across the room, and surrendered by treasonable degrees to the determination, now that it was autumn, to reconvene the seminar of love, anything to perpetuate after a fashion the summer's tenderness. Philosophical regret of a sort informs the hurdy-gurdiest of tunes, and simple pleas of disengagement, coolly worded, speckled with references to the mutual good, arouse. I'm sorry, what I say now is not meant to arouse. What I just said was not meant to arouse. What I had said, then kindly choose your interruptions. I'm sorry, what I had said, then kindly choose, you interrupted, your palindromes with less deliberation. Far better than I, you understood the perils of explication. You said, call again when this fever desists. I wavered. I dangled new conciliatory images before my inner eye. I would have launched a gaggle of plumed sounds had you let me. You favored no such corruption. You crossed your legs and bit your lip. I shuddered to think of the crowded intentions animating the wanest word I lugged from my lover's arsenal. A poem called Time Turned, Thoughts on the Film 2001, Stanley Kubrick's masterpiece, A Space Odyssey. Liken comprehensible history to a spotlight trilling the timeline, shining more forward than back. The point is, we lose a thing or two as we move forward, as only a finite span stays lit, the dimness never far behind. So science fiction's constructs, those freewheeling future fabulations, seem paradoxically more familiar in the lovely sense of that word, i.e., I know you, than let us say a Louis XVI chair, its strange design truly unknowable now in either intent or execution. And in some twist of effect and cause, with time itself undone, the objects found, the how and why forgotten. So the pyramids starkly recede, while time to come is embraced and lived as though, as the French say, already seen. Ballad. Our times together are gone now. We don't even bother to ask how. Love is a gift that makes it all possible. Art and life are less able to sidestep pride. Love is a dance. Love stands outside intelligence. And love's minds more, after all, than bed or dollar or anything material. Love has laws. Didn't Alice say that? Answer why with why not with because. One of my favorite poems, a little long, happened just by accident, not having seen Leonard Cohen for 20 or so years since we went in different directions. We talked for a bit on Bleecker Street, and he mentions out of nowhere the name of this poem. It's something that I haven't forgotten. Delia's Gone, based somehow on a folk song, maybe a Pete Seeger's, I'm not sure. Delia's Gone. Frail Delia whirled in modern dance and led you to expect the grace of her limbs to entertain all portions of her rhythmic body. Or she might have you so observing, test the supple muscle beneath her skin, though my hand's music chided. This was the belly Carl touched for love, an eye for humor. The gestures of her lover betrayed a happy guy who often grinned indifferently. For her part, Delia found no delight except perhaps in pain and telling how he almost knowingly used her to a sad purpose. Consoling her, I used to take her hand, remembering these were the fingers Carl touched for love and I for humor. Now when she died, no sky was sympathetic, no scattered leaves went brown. A mere disease attacked happened to have won. Mourning her was painful, and the occupation of those she'd known, while Carl too stayed glum. With a knowing smile, I settled that there died a heart Carl touched for love, and I for humor. Ultimately, though, he broke down and dropped the proper tears. He stared and gripped his head in an endless muttering of her name, so miserable in the loss, so empty-less is Delia. I was a spectator to the event, recalling the slender billfold Carl touched for love and I for humor. Leaps toad, a form of poetry called a Villanelle. You may recall there's a very famous Villanelle out there. Do not go gentle into that good night of Dylan Thomas. Leaps toad. You color my world with what my world lacked, a center, a purpose, death to forestall. You're my death wish, my death-defying act. That the things of the world repel and attract wasn't enough to keep me from a fall. You color my world with what my world lacked. I courted the devil and made a pact to clutch the moon, though first I had to crawl. You're my death wish, my death-defying act. For love and death are closely linked, in fact. I was dying of boredom before your call. You color my world with what my world lacked. And I don't expect to quit the world intact. Life's dancers should bear scars after the ball. You're my death wish, my death-defying act. I'm dying means with all my senses racked, I'm living the wisest passion of them all. You color my world with what my world lacked. You're my death wish, my death-defying act. A little change of pace. Happened to have a aunt who lived till close to 100, And when I visited her at the nursing home, she would recite poems in Yiddish. And one of the poems was by Avram Reisen, a very well-known and respected Yiddish poet, the late 19th, early 20th century. And I translated one of his poems called A Family of Eight. A family of eight, beds only two. When night comes, what do they do? Three sleep with father, sleep, three with mother, hands and feet braided together. When night comes and it's time for bed, mother begins to wish she were dead. She means it truly, and no wonder shown. The casket is also narrow, yet each person lies alone. Struck by a line of Ezra Pound's, as complicated and Ezra Pound is as a person and a historian, as an anti-Semite, etc. He did say, though, poetry should be at least as well written as prose, with a little irony there. I tried, Ezra, I really did. And then again, the whispering feeling, it's all summed up in the instantaneously transitional time of the moment, this second, the dish crashing to the tiled floor, the pain in the gut for no reason other than the butter stain on the trousers, the elation of finding at long last, a half hour later, the lost letter exactly placed where last left a long half hour ago. Yes, and oh, the overwhelming, spontaneous, screaming, loud, on learning that, I hesitate to tell you, Lorraine died the other day. I saw the obit in the Times. I don't know if I'd call it a poem, but it's something that has stayed with me in all the years that it stayed with me. I'm going back, very important historical feeling in my years, and I think I lived it when I had already moved to New York. It was the Vietnam War, and the horrors of the war were such that they left one pretty silent at times. I remember in particular one image on the television that just stayed with me, and I had an impulse, maybe a poem. And then as quickly I said to myself, what do you mean by that? A horror story? And you want to write a poem? I will not write a poem. And then in some crazy logic, the poem was going to be I'm not going to write a poem about this and exploit this tragedy. So that brought about something that's known as the Greek lyre, the paradox of the Greek lyre. The Greeks were already clever enough to know that there were problems in logic, that the person who says everything I say is a lie, not only can you not believe him, but you cannot not believe him. So I tried to write this down in a statement. I better call it a statement rather than a poem. But of course, that's also lying to myself. So I wrote down the statement, and then I found out that the statement itself, the statement of it was a title that was very long, and the element that was stated was very short. So I turned it around and made the title very short and the statement about it very long. Variation on the lyre paradox, composed on seeing in the movies blood gush like a fountain from the temple of a Viet Cong captive, shot cold-bloodedly at very close range. I will not write this poem. I will not write this poem. Variation on the lyre paradox, composed on seeing in the movies blood gush like a fountain from the temple of a Viet Cong captive, shot cold-bloodedly at very close range. I wonder how's my time. I'm going to play and very, if you give me a minute or so, 2 quick poems. Bagatelle in a minor key. How could it be otherwise? How could it otherwise be? Green winged teal, butterflies, contemplating the fiery sunrise, one aches to solve the mystery. How could it be otherwise? Lifeless, staring, plucked out eyes define ineffability. Green winged teal, butterflies. The truth beyond the border lies in the vastness of eternity. How could it be otherwise? It's futile to philosophize. The journey risks ignominy. Green winged teal, butterflies. For hurt cause, I apologize in intimations of mortality. How could it be otherwise? Green winged teal, butterflies. And just the last statement, plainly said, the not yet Buddha fled, faith and home, sickened by the shallow piety of both, and walked, then jogged through town into the beckoning woods beyond, past stacks of banyans, macalindas, and a ficus religiosa. Before, exhausted now, he fell asleep under a pipal tree. When he woke, he sensed, to the exclusion of every other thought, a truth invading his conscience. that essential pain wholly engulfed the world, more pain at any instant than any one mind could grasp. And all at once, legend has it, 100 tiny Buddha heads sprang from his forehead to help him comprehend. Once in a temple in Japan, I saw a giant Buddha head made of stone, bedecked with a ribbon of midget heads gracing the brow. And below which the immense carved countenance looked down with an expression of surpassing serenity. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Morty, for your reading. And I also draw attention that the book of work selected for many years is also available on Amazon.com, called A Taste, Poems. And you'll find it, just look up Morty Schiff on Amazon.com. No, I'm not an agent of Amazon.com, but they seem to be carrying the books. Some of you want to have the books to get to know these poets in greater measure. What I want to do now is, I don't want to throw a question at both of you unless you both don't mind it. What I never asked you in the emails we exchanged, Ricky, I mean, you left Canada right after, I think, or right before the Yom Kippur War in 1973. And I'm just wondering, when you left, you had a sense of Canadian poetry. You were in Toronto. Toronto, by the early 1970s, had begun to supplant Montreal as perhaps the most literary city of English Canadian poetry. So I just wanted to ask you, did you have any sense of that, or did that well up in you in Israel as you raised your family and worked there? And
No, I left Toronto after my first year of university in 1956 or 7. So I wasn't that familiar with Canadian poetry. I was familiar with Yiddish writers. My father was a literary critic and a writer in Yiddish. So I think to this day, I used to be able to quote by heart Leivik and Raisin, and those were the influences of my youth. And I only learned some Canadian poetry later on, Klein and Leighton, but I can't say that it formed my writing. And now that I've read, I have a confession. I don't really consider myself a Canadian poet in the sense that I spent 20 intensive years in Canada, but it wasn't Canada. I grew up in a bubble, continue to live in bubbles. I grew up in a bubble of Jewish identity, socialist, Jewish, Zionist. Wasn't the real world. And when I moved to Ann Arbor, where we lived in an academic bubble, and to Israel, where I live on a campus, and I'm all for bubbles. It really helps get through life.
I would disagree with you to say that we all live in bubbles, and from those bubbles, we actually burst out with our poetry and our writing. And those early years had more of an influence on you. You mentioned your father's interest, his Yiddish background. It's already apparent in some of the poems you wrote. And there's no doubt that something of his, can I call it passion, his interest, lived on in you to kind of flower later on. So much as you want to compartmentalize it, I think there is a flow, and there's a kind of subterranean flow that started when you were younger. And, I'm going to use the I suppose the immigration and citizenship rules of many countries. You were born in Canada. You spent key years in Canada. As far as I'm concerned, when you come to Canada, we charge you with Canadian literary criteria, and we consider you Canadian. Now I'm going to turn to Morty, and Morty was different because Morty, when he finished high school, stayed in Montreal, and I remember Morty's life. He went to Paris for 2 years, then he came back to McGill to do a PhD in physics, if I'm right. And then at the time, it was like now, there was no jobs in Canada, so he ended up getting a job at City University of New York, one of the campuses, where he stayed for the rest of his academic life. But the thing is that he was appointed to the physics department, and he was also appointed to the English department. So he had both, and he continued. His connection to Canada was a little closer. I mean, New York is not that far from the Canadian border, right? And his father was a Yiddish writer who had published a memoir. He has a family in Canada, and he spent probably more time in Canada. But when you were at McGill in the mid 1950s with Leonard Cohen and others, I mean, you had a strong sense of the community of letters there, and helped on with the professor we all shared, Louis Dudek, at the time.
Exactly right, Zalman. It was just taking one poem to Professor Dudek that resulted in Mr. Dudek saying he wanted to see more, and he had one of my poems published in a McGill, whatever it was. It might have been the Daily or Forge or something like that. And then inviting me to get-togethers with Leonard, Irving Layton, etc. And I found myself in a what would I call it, an atmosphere that Phyllis, oh, what, I'm blocking her name.
Phyllis Webb.
Phyllis, thanks so very, very much, whom I got to know quite well in Paris. We both ended up in a sojourn in Paris at the same time. So that's the way that happened. And it's stayed with me, and I'm very grateful. The inspiration, the people I met meant a lot to me. So, and you're quite right also that I commuted, living in New York, and New Jersey, commuted frequently to Canada, Toronto and Montreal.
So those years of in the 50s, Montreal was the undisputed kind of capital. It wasn't capital, but it had the most intense circles of English language writers at the same time as French Canadian writers were also coming into their own on the other side of the city, more to the east and of the McGill campus than to the west. But it left, no doubt, it left its mark on you. And as I say, that anthology by Raymond Souster is quite often forgotten. Souster was so taken with some of the younger poets, including yourself, that he did an anthology. He mimeographed it in his own basement, put a cover on it. It's really very expensive to buy that today. There are only a limited number of copies, but I remember seeing it years and years ago. And he didn't miss anybody. He got almost everybody then in the 1950s who were showing talent in Montreal and Toronto. And he betted on them. And I wish that anthology were put back into print so we could see how present he was about it. Did your father's writing in Yiddish have any influence on you?
Well, first of all, my father did not write in Yiddish. His biography
Right.
was written in English.
Oh, and
Uh,
someone translated it.
Well, the biography itself is published in English, and it's my father's English.
Okay. I thought he had translated from Yiddish, though.
Not at all. It's of course Yiddish was his native language, but when he came to Montreal, he immigrated to Montreal in the late 1920s. He went to what was it called? Even school? No, what do they call it at night? Even something
Evening
like that.
classes.
The afternoon school. We used to go afternoon school, yeah.
And after whatever it was, Nabokov wrote a series of stories of the teacher and the immigrant student. So he learned things that he never was able to learn in Europe. So he began to write in Roman letters, and I don't think he was able to write in Yiddish letters.
Mm-hmm.
So that book that you may know, and which is also available on Amazon and quite rare these days, was written in that broken Yiddish, written in English, but with a rhythm of, I don't know how to say it, but some quality of the native Yiddish that, of course, he grew up with and was the only language he knew for the first couple of years of his life, except maybe for Polish.
All right, I'm going to ask Jenny, are there any people who are watching who would like to have a question or two of our authors?
To tell you the truth, I have to go through the whole thing here, but we also are running out of time. But I can't thank all of you enough. This was unique and spectacular readings. I think every poem really chimed in on it was beautiful. I'm not no words really. I just wanted to mention that we will hopefully have another session like this in the future, and call upon more more poets, more writers to come forward and read what they wrote, and then hopefully we'll allocate more time to more speaking about the personal aspects and the experiences, because as I hear this, each one of us, I think we're 54 people here, I'm sure it rang very close to our hearts. And
Let me just add that we have in the works, so people
yes,
participate. This August will be the 50th yahrzeit of the great Jewish Canadian poet A.M. Klein, and we're thinking of doing a reading and discussion. Now, there are not many people alive who were friends of Klein, but there are a number of younger writers who were influenced by Klein, for whom Klein meant a lot. And we are going to try to involve them in a 1 hour, 1.5 hour session on Klein. And we also have another spilling over the Irving Layton event that we did a couple of months ago when Max Layton and I discussed Irving's Jewish poetry and his life work. Irving's third wife, Aviva Layton, has been interviewed in a number of sessions, and we are going to be editing a kind of a profile of her. And she also was in the world in Montreal. Vicky, you weren't there, but Morty was. In that world of Montreal in the 50s and 60s, she has many a tale to share about well-known writers, including her then husband, Irving, his best friend, Leonard Cohen, and others. And 2 or 3 stories I've never heard before. I thought I'd heard them all, and they're absolutely hilarious. I'm hoping whoever's tuned in today will give it some publicity. We probably won't be broadcasting it till probably about September, October, but Viva is in her late 80s. She's now in Greece for the summer, and I don't think we would want to broadcast it if she weren't around, because she may want to comment and intervene again. But she has wonderful stories that fill in the picture and also help me to fulfill what I've been trying to do here by bringing both Ricky and Morty here. I'm trying to fill out the picture of Jewish Canadian writing, which I think at the present time, for some reason in Canada, is not getting the attention it deserves. My dear friend Adele Wiseman is hardly spoken of. The academic world in Canada has almost abandoned writers like Irving Layton. Yet, outside of Canada, wherever I go, in the English-speaking, Spanish-speaking world, these writers are very well known. Their books are appreciated, they're translated, they're read. So this series is in a way, a kind of how shall I call it? A pedagogical has a pedagogical side to it to rekindle interest in the writers that we had, and show again that there is a very rich canvas of poets, especially poets, and also now prose writers, coming from the Jewish community of Canada, which certainly deserves a lot more public attention at the present time in Canada, and that may be a process of the cultural and politically correct issues going up in Canada. I should say that in Quebec, ironically enough, the writers of Montreal who wrote in English are even more appreciated now than ever before. And that is a great development that's happened in Quebec. And it would be great if we could do this program as well, and we could do this event in French as well as in English. But I think I'm jumping ahead of myself.
I think you are jumping ahead, but the more bubbles we put together, the more better off it'll be. I love that. I love the term bubbles, and indeed, we're creating now a new bubble, and hopefully we can continue. I just wanted to say thank you again to Ricky, to Morty, and of course Seymour, and to all our people in our group who have put this together, and everybody out there. We will bring more. Our website we will be putting all the information in there. I just wanted to say thank you to our sponsors, to the Jewish Federation of Ottawa, to the Congregation Bet Shalom Legacy Fund, and Limmud North America, and of course the Vered Jewish Canadian Studies Program at the University of Ottawa, and of course the Zelikovic Center for Jewish Studies at Caltech University, who have been all supporting us one way or the other throughout our time as Limmud and these last 24 months of our pandemic existence online. So thank you so much. Toda rabah, and we hope to see everybody back again, and stay safe. And thank you again for spending the time with us at Limmud. Litraot.
Thank you.
Thank you for
you.
the privilege of appearing with such great talent today. Thank you.
Yes, we're getting a lot of thanks from our viewers in the chat.
Yes, I right now cannot see my chat, but
Yeah, a lot of people are
send
thanking.
it right back to them. It's very heartfelt to see everybody here. Thank you.
And thank you, Alexandra, for making sure that we stayed afloat and didn't sink.
Our navigator. And thank you, Seymour. Keep strong, keep well.
Absolutely.
Yebare.
Thank you. And I'm hoping that in the next year I will see Ricky in person in their habitat, and also Eve and also Morty.
Thank you so much.
I hope to visit
Thank you.
New Jersey, and you'll help me find my distant relatives there. They all live somewhere near you, but I can't. I haven't.
With pleasure. With pleasure. I look forward to it.
It's just, Morty, been a pleasure hearing you and being. It's the first time I've heard your works, and I'm overwhelmed. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And I certainly discovered a voice that
Beautiful.
spoke to me very, very profoundly.
Thank you all. Next time again at Limmud. Be
Thank the
together.
wonderful audience, the people who tuned in,
Okay.
old friends.
The wonderful audience is able to speak now if they want.
Thank you, Alexander.
Yeah.
I think each one of the poets that presented today could have had an hour easily.
No
It was
question.
lovely with back and forth.
I can
with the
unmute
audience.
now. I would just like to say a personal word, if I could, to
Yes.
Ricky, who was my youth leader, my madricha. It's Rivi. I don't know if you recognize me.
Rivi Pekaris, of course.
Yes, Rivi Ullman now.
Yeah.
We go back, I don't know, 70 years more.
More.
And Ricky was my youth leader in the Zionist youth movement. And your poems were wonderful. And particularly the one about the Nuah, that was very evocative. And thank you very, very much. I enjoyed it profoundly.
I'm so glad to see you. I'm so glad you joined us tonight. It makes it very special.
Thank you, Ricky. Thank you.
It was a great youth, wasn't it?
Oh, that was very special. Very special.
Thank you. Anybody, feel free to say anything you want at this point, and then we'll wish everybody a safe journey on virtually a safe journey, and we'll see each other again soon.
Where is the questionnaire, the survey?
It should be at the end. As you close up, it'll pop up. It's just three small questions that enable us.
In here or in the email?
It'll show up. Alex, will it show up as an email?
It will show up on your screen when you leave the read. This thing here.
Okay.
Thank you very much for a nice evening.
Thank you for being with us.
People in Israel stayed up late.
We always do.
Yes.
Keep a sense of humor. It's very important.
Yes.
Could I just confess another confession that thank goodness for Zoom, because I'm sitting here and I'm sick with corona. My cough just reminded me. So there are great advantages.
Iris.
Wishing you refuah shlema. And I thank you for being here, even under the conditions of being sick.
Yeah, I was determined I wouldn't miss it.
It was just so heartfelt. Thank you. And let me remind everybody, this has been recorded, so you can go, once we upload it on our website, on the limmudottawa.ca website.
That was Ricky's best friend in Israel. We took it go back 70 years.